Let's look at another way to play Zacian in Sword and Shooter format. This time it's Zacian with Lucario Melmetal. Welcome back everyone to more from the Sableyes. I'm Mitch and today we're going to be taking a look at Zacian V paired up with Lucario Melmetal. This was a deck that ended up coming second in the most recent Japanese Champions League tournament and ended up losing to Pikachu Zekrom in the final, but it definitely has some strength to it. It'll be interesting to see how this more defensive build goes rather than the more offensive one that we see with Arceus, Dialga and Palkia. Without any further ado, let's get into the list. So we begin our look at the list with the name attacker in the deck. That is 4 copies of Zacian V. Zacian V, if you haven't looked at this card already, I would recommend you do so. It is incredibly strong, 220 HP, basic Steel-type Pokemon. Intrepid Sword is its ability. Draw 3 cards off the top of your deck and attach any metal energy that you find there to this Pokemon, and then your turn ends. Very, very strong in the early game, or if you have a couple of turns in the mid-game where you are struggling for attachments, you can just Intrepid Sword to fill your hand back up. And then the one attack that this card has, 230 damage for 3 metal energy, and then we cannot attack again next turn. 230 damage is going to be doing a lot to a lot of decks. It's not going to be doing quite as much as the ADP version of Zacian will be doing, but 230 still is not, it's not a lot, it's nothing to sneeze at. It's still pretty good, so we need to make sure that we are getting that attack off as regularly as possible. We don't really mind that we're not getting that extra boost to damage, because we're getting a little bit of extra boost to our resistance in 2 copies of Lucario and Melmetal Tag Team. This card obviously is a Tag Team Pokemon, so it gives up 3 prizes when there is a knockout, but Full Metal Wall allows it to firstly stop 30 damage from coming onto this Pokemon, so it reduces the amount of damage that the opponent's Pokemon do to your Pokemon by 30 damage to your metal Pokemon, which means that with a Frying Pan, which the deck also runs, you're doing a huge minus 60 damage to all attacks coming in to this Pokemon, and suddenly your Zacian goes from having 220 HP to effectively 280 HP. When you are attacking with a 2-prize attacker that has 280 HP and does 230 damage a turn, that is incredibly strong. Lucario Melmetal has a couple of other attacks that you might use. Steel Fist, obviously, 2 colorless energy for 50 damage means that you can accelerate some metal energy onto this Luca Metal if you choose, and you also have Heavy Impact for 2 metal and 2 colorless, does 150 flat. You'll probably not be using these attacks as much, but once you've used your Full Metal Wall, if you've done it once to do the damage reduction, or even if you've done it twice to discard all of the energy off of your opponent's active Pokemon, then you've got plenty of time to set yourself up with some attacks here and allow your Zacians time on the bench to prepare. If you do attack with Heavy Impact, or even with Zacian V, and you don't do the full amount of damage required to take a knockout, we can utilize Duskmane Necrozma here with Dusk Shot in order to snipe some damage onto GX Pokemon that might be sitting on the bench. Means that 230 damage against a Mew Mew, for example, that's obviously not going to be a knockout, but with 1 Dusk Shot, if it does retreat out of the active to avoid being knocked out, we can take those extra prizes. So Dusk Shot, very, very powerful to snipe that extra damage. Of course, you do need to be on the lookout for Mews on your opponent's side of the field, but it is a decent option for you. And since we've got energy acceleration for metal types, Rusty Claws actually is an attack that you might consider using for 2 metal and a colorless, 100 damage, which in itself isn't that bad for a 1-prize attacker. And if your opponent has 1 prize card remaining, you can potentially do 200 damage with this attack. 100 plus 100 if your opponent has 1 prize left means that 200 damage could be coming your opponent's way. That's a knockout on a Dedenne and a lot of other Pokemon that are floating around at the moment that are worth a couple of prizes. So definitely worth considering. You're probably not going to use it that often. Dust Shot is the reason it's in the deck, but you have that utility with you in this one. Now, we mentioned Mew floating around. This list plays one as well. The last thing we want is to give Pikarom free knockouts on the bench. We don't want Pokemon being knocked out unless they are in the active, so we want to force our opponent to do minus 60 damage to us We don't want to let them get the full effect of their attack off. So Mew stops that from happening. It also means that you can potentially do some cool plays where you set up little Mew snipes to take knockouts that you might not have been able to do otherwise. Pokemon with 240 HP like Pikarom might get hit for 230 by Zacian. It's only just not enough, but the Mew can come in the late game and just take those prizes for free effectively. So it's like another Dustmane, except obviously not quite as powerful, but that bench barrier ability is really, really strong. We also have one copy of Oranguru in this list. We don't play things like Dedenne. We don't play an extremely high draw support account. We're relying a little bit on Zacian V's Intrepid Sword. Oranguru can kind of help smooth out those turns when you need just that one extra card to get you across the line. But the more important thing that it does is it allows you to put a Metal Energy on top of your deck. Obviously, Oranguru's attack is not going to be used in this one. The ability allows you to place a card from your hand on the top of your deck and you draw the card that was there. So you can put the Metal Energy on top and then Intrepid Sword, guaranteeing yourself that extra attachment onto Zacian, which can be very strong. And like I said, it does just smooth out the deck a little bit. It's not ultra consistency boosting, but it's definitely helpful when it is available. We also have one copy of Absol in the list as well. You'll notice there's lots of decks that have Jirachi floating around. Jirachi doesn't really like dealing with Absol, so we figured we'd put it in and see how it goes. But Absol is probably one of those Pokemon that you're going to see cut from some lists in Western lists, just because it's not necessarily as impactful as other Pokemon could be. Now, I mentioned the supporter line. It's not a super thick supporter line when it comes to draw supporters, but we do play the maximum 4 copies of Professor's Research. Magnolia is an incredibly strong card. Discard your hand and draw 7 is very strong, and it means that if you go second, you could potentially discard your hand, draw 7, and then Intrepid Sword for another 3 as well. So it's super, super good in order to draw new cards in your hand. If you don't want to draw new cards and instead you want to disrupt your opponent, then Marnie could be the way to go for you. Shuffle your hand, put it on the bottom of your deck. You draw 5, your opponent draws 4. Obviously very strong. Now we've got a lot of cards in our deck that we can kind of play out. They're kind of auto plays in our deck, so we might find ourselves with low hand sizes from time to time, and people's benches are actually quite full at the moment in this format. So one card that we've included is Erica's Hospitality. Erica allows you to draw up to 6 if your opponent has that amount of Pokemon on the field of play, and we can only do that if we have 4 cards or less in our hands. So Erica's is very, very strong here, and it is very useful if we do have a hand that is quite low, but there's things like maybe metal patches that we don't want to get rid of. There's also 2 copies of Mallow and Lana. There's obviously that restriction on Zacian V that means that it cannot attack after it has attacked once, so you need to switch it out of the active somehow. Mallow and Lana is really strong for doing that, not only because it allows you to switch, but also because your opponent is unlikely to be one-shotting Zacian. So if you can Mallow and Lana heal a bit of damage, 120 off, then your Zacian can effectively take hits up to 180 damage with effectively no side effects. So Mallow and Lana, incredibly strong. We also play one copy of Cynthia and Caitlin as well. It's obviously good to get those supporters back. You can find yourself an extra Mallow and Lana if you need it, but it's also searchable draw from things like Tag Call, so we want to make sure that we have access to that as well. Like I said, it's not like a super thick supporter line when it comes to draw. There's still 7 or maybe 8 if you count Cynthia and Caitlin as draw supporters, but you know, you've got to do what you've got to do. When it comes to the items, this is where it really kind of helps create a bit of problems for your opponent. When it comes to Pokemon Search, we've got 4 copies of Quick Ball. Discard 1 and find a basic from your deck. Every Pokemon in our deck is basic, so Quick Ball searches out everything. And Tag Call also searches out our 2 copies of Lucario Melmetal. Like I mentioned, it can find Mallow and Lana and Cynthia and Caitlin as well. So Tag Call is incredibly strong. We also have 3 copies of Metal Frying Pan. This is part of our Disruption combo, I guess, where we're reducing the amount of damage that our opponents can do. This, in combination with Full Metal Wall, will stop 60 damage coming onto your Metal-type Pokemon, and it will remove weakness. So things like Baby Blacephalon won't be able to get through those iron defenses. So a really, really strong card. We've got 3 of them because, realistically, you're going to have, what, a Lucario Melmetal, and then two Zacians to close out your game. You don't really need more than 3, and by the time that you get down to needing the 3rd one, you've probably unprized everything you need anyway. The real issue with this is probably in the early game. Since there's 3 of them, it might take you a little bit of time to get into one to attach to a Lucametal or to a Zacian, but at the moment 3 is probably the optimum count for us. When it comes down to the support to attach energy, we've got 4 copies of Metal Patch. It's obviously an incredibly strong card that gives Metal-type Pokemon a massive boost going into Sword and Shield. And unlike Aqua Patch, which didn't really see a huge amount of play, there are a ton of strong basic Metal Pokemon, including the one that you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. Zacian V is super good, so these pair quite well together. It means that you can essentially go from having nothing on the field to having a Zacian with 3 energy attached with a snap of your fingers. 2 Metal Patch and an attachment gets you there. We have 4 copies of Switch in the list, as well as 1 copy of Air Balloon. Like we mentioned, we need to be getting these Zacians in and out of the active as quickly as possible. 4 copies of Switch, 1 Air Balloon, and 2 Malamilana will mean that most of the time we don't need to manually retreat. We can switch into a Pokemon that has Air Balloon on it, and then manually retreat back into our Zacian and get ready to attack again. So we've got plenty of flexibility when it comes to Switch. We might consider putting in an extra Air Balloon if you just want that extra consistency. We also play 3 copies of Crushing Hammer in the list. Like we said, it's a little bit more disruptive than the aggressive version. We're going to be reducing damage, and we're also going to be trying to take away some of our opponent's energy. If you can remove an energy attachment from some decks, they fall apart, and Crushing Hammer can help you do that. Obviously, it's on a coin flip, but I would rather flip a coin to see if I win a game by removing energy than not have the option to do so. So we have 3 copies of Crushing Hammer for that. We also play 4 copies of Custom Catcher. We want to be able to take specific knockouts when we can. The last thing we want is for our opponent to be able to gust them or to move themselves around their board, and we can't do a full knockout onto a Pokemon. Custom Catcher will allow us to target Pokemon V and Pokemon, or the regular Pokemon, not Pokemon GX. We also have 1 great catcher for things like the Dene that are sitting on the bench. Means that we're going to be able to quite easily target down the prizes that we want. We need to make sure, though, that we don't discard too many custom catchers too early. We have a little bit of discard in the deck, so we don't want to lose those if we can afford it. Final trainer cards, we have 2 copies of Chaotic Swell. This deck doesn't really need any specific stadium, but what it doesn't like is decks putting down Power Plant and things like that. Well, not Power Plant so much, that's not a big deal, but, you know, things like Giant Hearth or any other stadium that's going to heavily benefit our opponent. We don't want those in play, we just want to get rid of them. Chaotic Swell allows us to do that. It means that they can't get rid of, they can't put down stadiums that they want to use that will really annoy us. So Chaotic Swell, obviously very strong. I fumbled my way through the end of those trainers there, but it is a pretty strong trainer line. Obviously, if you don't like things like Crushing Hammer in the list, you don't need to play them. They were in the Japanese list that we've kind of we've effectively taken. So if you've got a problem with it, take it up with them, because he came second in that big tournament. So he seems like a pretty solid source for a base list for me. Anyway, now that I'm mumbling on, we've got 11 Metal Energy. I'm going to straighten those up for you there. 11 Metal Energy, 4, 8, 11. It's probably the amount that you're going to need. We want to be discarding some early. We don't want to be finding ourselves in positions where we have no Metal Energy in the bin. But we also don't want to have too many either. So 11 seems like the prime number for us. We want to make sure that we can get those attachments when required. So there we have it, our list for Zacian Melmetal, which we've been testing against a whole bunch of different decks in the format. Very strong, very defensive, and if your game style fits that particular method of playing, then you'll have a great time with this deck. Thank you everyone for coming along. If you like the content, then consider subscribing. Only about 40% of the people who watch our videos subscribe, and they click this button just here, and they make me feel happy about myself. Over on this side are some videos that you can watch, and down the bottom here is a couple of videos in the playlist that you can watch to keep your testing going for Sword and Shield. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at @thesableeyes_YT, and otherwise we'll see you all next time for more from the Sable Eyes. Bye.